means that the number one pick in the 2021 NBA draft goes to the Detroit Pistons.
Who's got the number one pick in this year's draft? Who's got the number one pick in this year's draft?
Basketball!
Select Isaiah Stewart.
The Detroit Pistons select Killian Hayes.
Sadiq, that was absolutely sensational.
I don't know what went into that process. I met the criteria to be selected, but I wasn't.
From long range. Oh! Yes!
Detroit basketball! Pistons fans, welcome back to this edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mike Anguilano, and joining me is Aaron Johnson. Aaron, how are you doing today, buddy?
Doing really good, Mike. We've got a major story that broke earlier today regarding the Pistons to discuss. It's sad we don't have Jasper here with us. You know, he wanted to work his other job. You know, he didn't want to come in today and put in the hours with us. It hurts. It feels bad, especially with such an important topic to discuss. But I'm happy to be here with you, and I'm ready to go to work. I'm ready to talk about this.
You know, he did go 0-2 to us back-to-back weeks in fantasy football in our league. You know, I don't know if I would show my voice either.
Yeah, maybe he's just like embarrassed. That could be it.
Well, I think I beat him by 90 points. So I don't know if I would, talk either. He might need a week to recover from that beatdown. So
you're the team
we'll just have to see. What's that?
So you're the team to beat.
I don't think so. I think I've gotten very lucky with Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Antonio Gibson. I think gotten very, very lucky. I'm trying to sell high on them. And then I will be burned when they both have stellar seasons. I'm a little bit more optimistic about Clyde Edwards-Helaire and that offense than I am about Antonio Gibson and Carson Wentz. But this is not a fantasy football podcast. This is a Palace of Pistons podcast. And the Detroit Pistons have finally made a move. They have not made too many moves, sticking with their young core, but they made a major move. And we're going to spend probably all of the podcast talking about it. But before we start onto that, I'd like to talk about our sponsor, and that sponsor this week is BetOnline. And BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all of your favorite sports, contests, and events with first-to-market odds and lines. Find reviews and news for every league, including Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports information, from live in-game betting, props, and futures. So head on over to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to join. Make your first sports bet using our promo code BELIEVE50. That's BLEAV50 to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's BLEAV50 on your first deposit. Get a 50% welcome bonus on your first bet. BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, let's get right into it. The Detroit Pistons made a trade. I think Czar has been talking about trading Kelly Olynyk for something for the last 5 to 8 months. And today it finally happened. The Pistons are sending Kelly Olynyk and Saben to the Utah Jazz for Bojan Bogdanović. That is per Shams Charania of The Athletic. He had it first. So, the instant reaction is, yes, they traded Kelly Olynyk finally. They got off of his contract. A little sad to see Saben Lee go because he's been with the organization, has played his butt off in the G League. There is nothing else he could do in the G League. So it's unfortunate that, you have to move on from him. But the Pistons get Bojan Bogdanović, who really solves just about every wing fear that the Pistons had. But the first reaction was, that's a great move for the Pistons. That solves a lot of the problems that they were having, not just on the wing, but on the team, because Bogdanović is a much better shooter than I think most of the other wing options that existed on the roster, or at least the players that they were going to play on the wing. Aaron, what were your first thoughts when this trade came down?
this was just a home run hit from Troy Weaver. You're talking about a guy that, albeit he is 33, albeit he's not a super athlete, he's not a 30-point per game scorer, but this is exactly the type of move that the Pistons needed to make. They needed three major things in my eyes. They needed more forward depth. They needed more shooting. And they needed a guy that had some experience. I mean, this is a very, very young team. And to be able to get a starting level player for two guys that, we talked a little bit about the type of role Kelly Olynyk might have on this team. And it was just going to be tough for him long-term to fit in. And even in the sense of long-term, this upcoming season long-term, because of the bigs logjam that Detroit has. Obviously, Isaiah Stewart's going to start. They traded for Nerlens Noel. They traded to draft Jalen Duren. There's three centers right there. They re-signed Marvin Bagley. They have Isaiah Livers. It was just really going to be tough for Kelly Olynyk to play either the 4 or the 5 with this team because of all the other names and the youth that the Pistons wanted to play. And you were able to get a starting level player for a guy that was not worth it financially. And then another guy who, hey, Saben Lee played his butt off in the G League. Props to him. G League All-Star, G League MVP type player. But once he got to the NBA, we know what he was. He wasn't good enough to play consistently in the NBA, at least from what we had seen. And he had been given chances. He had the opportunity to go up and down in the G League, come back up, try to find a rhythm, try to build consistency. And unfortunately for him, it just didn't happen. Not a good enough shooter, not a good enough distributor. Unfortunately, it just wasn't all there for him. And when you looked at Detroit's roster this year, there really wasn't going to be an opportunity for him. You have Cade Cunningham, you have Corey Joseph, you have Killian Hayes, you brought in Jaden Ivey and Alec Burks, two other ball handling guards. It was just the writing was on the wall for Saben Lee, unfortunately. So he goes to Utah. Maybe he has a chance to play there. But Bojan Bogdanović is a huge acquisition for Detroit. And it shows me that this is a team that is going to try to be more competitive this year. You have to play in. You get 10 playoff teams, or if you want to consider the 9 and 10 seed playoff teams, you have a shot to get to the postseason as a 9 or 10 seed. And I think this move really helps. It really stimulates Detroit's chances at being one of those teams. You looked at this roster, and we had talked about this all year, all offseason on the podcast. You've got your 1, 2, and 3 kind of locked in. You've got your 5 essentially locked in. We didn't know who was going to start at the 4. It's something we have talked about since the beginning of the offseason. Would it be Bagley? Would it be Livers? Would it be Saddiq Bey? What were they going to do? And they made a decision, and they got a guy in Bogdanović who just fits everything that this team needed. A scorer, a 40% three-point shooter. This is a guy that's averaged greater than 17 points and greater than 38.5% three-point shooting over his last 4 seasons. In Utah in 3 seasons with Utah for his career, his last 3 seasons in the league, an average of 18.4 points, 4.1 rebounds, 1.9 assists, 39.7% three-point shooting, and he's also an 88% free throw shooter as well. So this guy is all about efficiency. He can score inside out. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Marcus Morris in a way that, he can play in the post a little bit, knows how to target mismatches. But then on a different note, this guy is just an absolute marksman from beyond the arc. High release point, can get off his shot, very easy. Not a terrible ball handler. He's certainly not a guard, but he is a bit of a point forward in that sense. And it's just such a great move for Detroit. I think it's going to be interesting to see how he fits in defensively with this group. I think Detroit is set up to, at least in the starting lineup, struggle a bit defensively if they go with the group that I think they'll go with. But I think the potential issues there are pennies on the dollar compared to what he's going to bring to this team offensively He brings a veteran with winning experience. Just a home run hit by Troy Weaver and company. Really, really like this move for Detroit, especially at the price point that they acquired him at.
Right, and that's kind of what I was excited about. But it's worth noting that Bogdanović is a $19 million expiring contract. Kelly Olynyk only had a $3 million guarantee on the final year of his contract, so the Jazz get a little bit of financial flexibility down the road. But they only had to give up Olynyk and Saben Lee. And I like Saben Lee. There's no idea. I mean, there's just no for sure fit for him on this roster. You're not going to move Killian Hayes for him, and there were vets behind Cade and Hayes that I think they wanted to keep, like Corey Joseph. So there just was no real role for him. But I think he should get some playing time with Utah. That's a team that is probably not done making moves. They're probably going to look to offload Mike Conley, or at least see what they can get. They're probably going to try and offload Jordan Clarkson and see what they can get. I am surprised that other teams. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Aaron.
I just want to say, since you brought up Mike Conley and Clarkson and the Jazz, I know that reports kind of came out that they were shopping these guys. I would say I was absolutely taken aback by this move. I did not expect Detroit to be one of the teams to make a play on this.
Right.
I wasn't expecting them to be involved in a Bogdanović trade. I really like it. I wasn't expecting them to do this, though. So I don't know how you felt, but it certainly caught me by surprise.
Yeah, it's very surprising, and it does help in the short term. I don't know if this pushes the Pistons over into play-in territory, because they are still so young. They are 1 year more seasoned playing together, but they're still a pretty young team. And if the team's not doing well, or starts off not so hot, but Bogdanović is playing well, I mean, that's a trade chip as an expiring. Some team will be happy to take a chance on him if the team's not playing well. But to see the Pistons swing for a player that starts to inch them closer to play in territory, I was not expecting that. I thought there would be other teams that, if had they known the price was Kelly Olynyk and Saben Lee, I feel like there would have been other teams around the league that could have ponied up and traded for him with some better players. The Lakers have been linked to any breathing body that has playoff experience and that can shoot, and they did not jump on this. They did a different trade with the Utah Jazz centered around Taylor Horton Tucker and Patrick Beverley, but they didn't get in on Bojan Bogdanović, and I feel like that's a team that could have. I mean, basically, any team needs wing help, and any playoff team that assumes they have enough wing help probably needs more wing help. It's kind of like starting pitching in Major League Baseball. If you think you have enough starting pitching, then you need to get more starting pitching. Kind of the same deal. So I was very surprised that the Pistons went in and, I think, very under the radar, snuck around all the playoff teams and nabbed a very good player that, if things go well, they have him and they are, a playing team, and he fits what they need. Like you said, an offensive fit like a glove. He's definitely going to start. He solves the who's going to start at the 4 question. So now I think your starting lineup is set in stone. Rip the dream on Isaiah Livers being the starting 4, maybe next year, as Jasper said in our chat. But they kind of snuck in and grabbed him. And you start him now. If the team plays well, you maybe make some noise and could be a play-in team. Things go south quickly, you can flip him again, or you just keep him on the roster and he's an expiring $19 million, and you go into next offseason with more cap space. I think it's a win-win either way.
I agree. And like you said, things could go horribly wrong. And at the end of the day, all this did was free up cap space for Detroit next season. It just opened up a little over $12 million of cap room to use next summer if they didn't want to bring him back. And in the current, it opened up another roster spot. Assuming Detroit waives Kemba Walker, or I guess trades him, I think it would be a buyout, though. I don't know why it hasn't happened still. Maybe this was the last thing holding up the buyout. But this opens up a roster spot for Detroit after Walker's removed from the roster. And Walker will be removed from the roster. There's been some pictures circulating of the Pistons, being together, doing some team stuff. Walker's not with them. Olynyk was there. I'm pretty sure Saben Lee was there. Walker was not with them. So the writing is on the wall. Kemba Walker's not going to be suiting up for the Pistons. This opens up another roster spot for Detroit. However, I think Detroit's going to need to like get moving on the whole Walker situation because training camp starts next week. They're kind of want to get these guys in the building so they can go into training camp and have their group together. And maybe their addition is going to be a guy that's going to fight for a final spot. So maybe some of these other guys that we've seen them sign to these Exhibit 10, essentially training camp deals, maybe it's going to be up to that group to earn that final spot. But you imagine they'd at least bring the full 20 guys that they can to camp and let them fight it out. Or they could still be trying to nab a veteran free agent. But that was another aspect of this trade that I thought was important. Bogdanović is absolutely going to help near term right away. Walks in as your starting 4, and it gives you cap space flexibility for next year, and it gives you another roster spot to play with this year, which I like because, like I said, Saben Lee, as I don't necessarily get why people are torn up about losing Saben Lee. Like, we kind of saw what he was. He wasn't really going to play this year. So getting him off the roster and getting Olynyk off the roster where you had a logjam at your deepest position, those are good things. To have another roster spot, to grab another shooter, like if Phoenix hadn't signed Frank Jackson, like maybe that would have opened up an opportunity to bring him back. But getting another shooter in the building should be something that Detroit should be looking at now that they're going to have this spot to work with because they still are going to need shooting. This is still a team that doesn't have enough shooting. You really never have enough shooting. Like in the same way you never had enough forward depth, you never can have enough shooting. But yeah, this trade it did a lot for Detroit in terms of the player they got and the flexibility that the move itself created around the player. So I'm absolutely shocked that this was the value on Bogdanović. Not that he was going to be worth a whole lot. Like, I don't think he was worth a first-round pick considering, if you're a contending team, that's $19 million of your cap space. I don't think a contending team really can afford that. But
no.
So this worked out very, very well for Detroit. And props to Troy Weaver. Like, I'm never the guy to shy away from knocking a move and knocking a decision. I'm not going to shy away from giving credit either. This was a really good trade. And if it doesn't work out, like, there's not going to be anyone that's looking back and saying, hey, I told you this wasn't going to work. Like, this is a guy that is a model of consistency, has playoff experience, and he comes in and he answers your biggest question, your biggest hole on the roster. It is unfortunate for Isaiah Livers, though, and I think it has some interesting implications on that 4 spot.
Yeah, so we are going to talk about starting lineups and rotations, but you know how I like to just ask some open-ended questions and, well, maybe not open-ended, but some trivia. So 3-point attempts per game for last year. Which Piston attempted the most threes per game?
Saddiq Bey.
He did at 7.4. Who was second?
Whew, good question. I'm going to go with, I guess I'll just go with Cade.
Cade was second at 5.7. So Bogdanović instantly becomes their second highest volume 3-point shooter. He attempted 6.8 threes last year for the Utah Jazz. He knocked down 38.7%, which is his lowest since looks like 2016-17 when he was on Brooklyn. But that Utah Jazz team just had bad vibes pretty much the whole season, particularly the later half of the season when it became pretty apparent that they were about to walk into the same trap they walked in several years prior. So Cade was second. Jeremy Grant was third. Who was fourth?
Okay, that's going to stump me. Corey Joseph.
Frank Jackson.
Okay,
no
that would have
longer
been my next guess. That would have been my next guess.
Yeah, who is no longer on the team. So the Pistons were one of the worst 3-point shooting teams. I don't have the numbers in front of me. If they weren't last,
Ninth.
They were.
That is etched in my mind. They were 29th.
I was going to say they were freaking close.
3-point and true shooting percentage. The only team worse than them was Oklahoma City.
Who actively tried to not put the ball into the hoop. for
Yeah.
a sizable portion of the season.
Correct.
So this will, at least on that level, stretch the offense just a little bit in a way that they really weren't able to do at all. So, and then in terms of 3-point makes, Isaiah Livers and Corey Joseph were the best at making 3-point shots. Good old Rodney McGruder was third, and Justin Robinson, who I believe had a cup of coffee at the end of the season,
I always
was
forget
fourth.
that Rodney McGruder is back on the roster. It's like every year, it's just like they go to training camp, and I'm like, oh my gosh,
Right.
Rodney McGruder's still on the Pistons. Like, is this guy going to end up being like a 6-year Piston? I mean, he's going into what, year 4? Like,
Death taxes, Rodney McGruder.
how is he still around? This guy got traded.
This is his third season with them. This is his third season coming up.
Wow, it feels like
With
it's
the
been way
Pistons.
longer than that. And I forget every week that he's on the team. Like, something has to happen to remind me, oh yeah, Rodney McGruder's still around.
Do you know how old he is?
He's probably only like 29.
You're really good. He is 30. But he's only played for Detroit for 2 seasons. He did get traded, come back from the dead, immediately have a good game. He was third on the team in 3-point percentage. So Bojan Bogdanović is going to make a big difference.
Yeah, he is. Again, this is not an all-star level player by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
At some
But
point,
it's a good fit.
he's 33. There's going to start to be some decline. But his game is also pretty friendly to his age. Like, he's never been a hyper athlete, fast-paced guy. Like, he's always been a kind of like Cade Cunningham in the sense, like, lull you to sleep kind of guy, a lights-out shooter.
He's like Joe Ingles.
His size. Yeah, he's very similar to Joe Ingles. And both those guys are still good players. I mean,
Yep.
age can be what it is. This is a guy that's averaged 17 points per game or more in the last 4 seasons. He's had 2018-19, he was at 18 points a game. The next season, he was at just over 20. And 2020-2021, he was at 17. And last year, just over 18 points per game. And a 39% or better 3-point shooter, 38.7 and above throughout those years. Like, those 2 stats alone, the Pistons need scorers, they need shooters. Bogdanović does that, and he's a veteran presence. It's unfortunate for Livers. I think it brings some questions to how that kind of shakes out. But you when you have a chance to get a talent like that, who's going to make life so much easier for Cade Cunningham, getting shooting out there for him, guys that teams know they have to leave a man on so that they can't just suck into the paint and eliminate Cunningham or even Ivy's ability to get to the cup and do their thing. That's huge. So, and again, it opens up cap space for next season if Detroit decides they don't want to bring him back, or likely if they didn't bring him back, likely at a lesser rate per year, it just opens up cap space for Detroit to play with. So there's just I don't think you can spin this in a negative way for Detroit.
No, I think all around it's a very, very good trade in the short term and in the not so distant future in terms of cap space. But let's go ahead and talk about lineups, because I think we've talked a lot about the future Pistons talk of we're gonna have to make some decisions on Isaiah Stewart and Saddiq Bey and dole out some contracts, and they're gonna have cap space. That's all well and good, but for the immediate upcoming season, we didn't know who was really going to play the 4, particularly after Jeremy Grant was traded, and probably a little bit before that, because we kind of knew that he wasn't going to be playing for the Pistons much longer. We have solved that. So is the starting lineup set in stone? Are they going to run with Cade, Ivy, Saddiq Bey, Bogdanović, and Isaiah Stewart?
I would be shocked if they ran with anything else. Like, I guess the only position I'd say right now that's of question is shooting guard.
Right.
Will they start Jaden Ivey? I think they absolutely should. I think it would be a crime if they didn't. I think bringing in a guy like Bogdanović, a veteran presence, there is your veteran in the starting lineup for this group. And like, Stewart and Bey are going into year 3, so they're not babies anymore. They're men. They know how to conduct themselves out there. Cade Cunningham, one of the most, mature young players in the league. Like, I get the idea of, oh, he's a rookie, like you want to ease him into it. No, not in this case. Like, you're still, if everything shoots right for you, a play-in team. Like, you still got a ways to go. So you need to get your rookie out there. It should be a good lineup for him to operate in with some extra shooting, and he deserves it. Like, this is a top 5 pick. Like, he's earned that right. Alec Burks can come off the bench, provide some shooting alongside Killian Hayes, with Isaiah Livers. Like, you can figure out the bench. Jaden Ivey needs to be in your starting lineup. This, to me, was the final piece of the puzzle for that starting group because, like we talked about at the beginning of the pod, we didn't know what the starting 4 spot was going to look like. Was it going to be Olynyk? Was it going to be Livers? Was it going to be Bagley? And we didn't know. And I think training camp was going to be where we found that out. Training camp preseason, they still had to make that decision. Now that 4 spot's locked up. They're not bringing in a guy like Bogdanović, who's started every game of his career over the last 4 seasons, to come off the bench. Like, a guy that has playoff experience, is 10 years older than Isaiah Livers, 8 years older than Marvin Bagley, whatever it is. They're not bringing him off the bench for those guys. So, to me, the only position that's at question right now is the 2 spot with Jaden Ivey or Alec Burks. I would not bat an eye. It would be Jaden Ivey for me. Like, unless he comes out and just completely doesn't look the part in training camp, and as the coaching staff, they can, decide that. But if I had to bring out a lineup tonight at 7:00, it's Cade, Ivey, Bay, Bogdanović, and Stewart.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I would not be surprised in the slightest. I would have a flat face if Dwayne Casey comes out and says that Alec Burks is starting. Would not be surprised at all. That being said, I do think that now that Bogdanović is here and going to start, that, like you said, that's the veteran presence that lineup needed to sort of stabilize things, not just from a shooting perspective, but from a have an adult on the floor perspective. So I think that it should be Ivy now. He's your high upside guy. You want to get him minutes and see where it goes from there. In terms of a bench unit, though, does this really affect the rotation and how guys are going to be moving in and out of the rotation? I mean, you kind of slot them in. I think seems like the bench unit's kind of handled between Killian Hayes and Corey Joseph and Alec Burks and Hamidou Diallo. I mean, maybe Kevin Knox finds some minutes. For some reason, there's hype around Kevin Knox. I don't know what year it is, but there seems to be some hype around him.
People took that Rico Hines footage to heart over Kevin Knox. They saw that footage and were like, oh yeah, this guy was like a top 5 pick. This guy's going to be amazing. And no, like, I tweeted out the rotation that I would have, if I had to put out a group today. I tweeted out earlier after the trade. The starting lineup is what we just talked about. The backup units, Killian Hayes, and then off the bench with him, Alec Burks, Isaiah Livers, Marvin Bagley, and Nerlens Noel. So that leaves Hamidou Diallo, Rodney McGruder, Jalen Duren, and Corey Joseph out of the initial 10, which is, usually what teams go. Teams usually go 10 deep.
Right.
Wouldn't shock me if the Pistons open up the season, at least the first couple weeks going 11 or 12 deep. I don't think Corey Joseph's just not going to play to start the year. And I think they'd like to try to get Jalen Duren some minutes. But once Detroit winds down the rotation, everyone's healthy, all that being said, I think that's the 10 we'll see, and you're going to have that rest of that group kind of on the outside looking in. Like, unless things go wrong with Killian Hayes, they're going to have to give him, that opportunity, because then they have to make a contract decision on him. So he's going to be in the rotation. And I think Nerlens Noel is going to get minutes off the bench as much as we'd like to see Jalen Duren. I don't know if they're going to rush that. He's a raw, young prospect, one of the youngest players in college basketball last year. I don't think they're going to rush it with him, and I think that's fine. Like, try to get him some minutes the first couple weeks of the season. I don't think it would be a terrible thing if he played a few games in the G League, if you had like some of those 2 days where the Crews were playing one night and the Pistons were playing the next night at home. You know, both teams were home, so they're a couple minutes down the road. Like, I don't think that's a terrible thing. I don't think he's in the rotation right away to start the year, at least not at 15, 18 minutes a night. Like, maybe he's that 11th or 12th guy off the bench just because they want to get him a little bit of run. But I think that group of 10 is – it shouldn't really be much of a question at this point. I don't think Rodney McGruder or Diallo are going to be in it. I think the biggest question is what happens with Corey Joseph and Jalen Duren. If they're the outside guys looking in, I think Dwayne Casey's going to want to get minutes for Joseph because that's his guy. And I think there's going to be at least some emphasis from the top down to try to get Duren in the game a little bit. So that's how I see it shaking out.
Well, you know, Jalen Duren's pathway to playing opened up a little bit with Kelly Olynyk being off the roster. So that should clear things up a little bit more for him.
And there will be injuries too. You know, the Pistons are not a team that is a great source of staying healthy. Marvin Bagley's going to miss some time, right?
Yeah, that's going to happen.
Bogdanović misses a handful of games every year, at least over his last 3 seasons. You know, so he's going to miss some time. I know Stewart plays most of the time, you know, if bearing a major injury, like there will be things that happen that open up playing time across the board for these other guys. It happens every year. It's about capitalizing on the opportunity when you get it. So like if Duren's not in the rotation to start the year, but a couple weeks in, someone goes down, he gets his chance, he's got to capitalize on it. I mean, it's like Kelly Olynyk last year. Got hurt early in the season, forced some other guys into the fold, and Olynyk kind of struggled once he came back to get his footing. So there will be opportunities for playing time for everyone at some point. I mean, even Rodney McGruder is gonna play for this team. So it's the same thing every year.
So Jalen Duren's path to playing has opened up a little bit as well, and he is mega young. I don't think people understand how difficult it is for young guys. Like we see Evan Mobley and Kate Cunningham and Luka Doncic walk into the NBA and they're freaking good immediately. And then they see another 19-year-old that's like, oh man, or 18. I think he's only, how old is he? He's 18. He'll be 19 on November 18th. It's not normal to have a young player come into the league and know what the heck they're doing. But he will have more time to play. Corey Joseph is really important to me because if you're going to run Killian Hayes as the backup point guard, that second unit is going to be brutal scoring the basketball, particularly shooting the basketball. Marvin Bagley developing an outside shot. I mean, between him and Burks, those are your guys to make an outside shot. And I don't like either of those guys particularly. Right. Isaiah Livers would be probably your best option.
Yeah. I have him in the rotation as of today. Yeah. I have Hayes.
You definitely should.
Livers, Bagley, and Noel. So not a ton of shooting. Hayes and Bagley are both guys that need to take major leaps in terms of their outside shooting. I don't know if either of them ever does. I'm pretty certain Bagley's not going to. The shot form from the pictures we're seeing of Killian Hayes doesn't look encouraging from this offseason. So it's going to put a lot of pressure on Burks and Livers. So maybe that creates an opening for a guy like Corey Joseph. Maybe.
I think it does.
So
I think I really think it does because that is a guy that you said Dwayne Casey trusts, and Killian Hayes is going to be given every opportunity to play well. This is a very important year for him. This is a make or break year for him before he turns into Frank Ntilikina as a good defensive player that you don't want doing hardly anything else. This is an important season for him. We're gonna have plenty of opportunities to talk about Killian Hayes.
We will, but I don't think it's a stretch to say this is a make or break year for him.
No, I think that would be the expectation. I mean, some people were treating last year as a make or break year for him to show that he wanted to drive to the hole, that he was able to use his offhand to show that he was able to hit an outside shot, or at least be willing to take one. Some people thought last year was that type of make or break, but this year it definitely is.
Yeah.
And you're going to have guys that need to be paid. You're going to have a lot of cap space to make a, potentially a big move. We've talked about this on past podcasts, like a Devin Booker type. And the Suns are an entire different story right now.
Existence.
I'm sorry?
Speak it into existence, Devin Booker.
Right. Speak it into existence. So there's going to have to be some tough decisions. We're getting into tough decision time for the Pistons. We've had plucky, bad Pistons that, they'll win a couple games. Oh, wow, they really took the Lakers down to the wire and lost. That whole thing's about to end because they're making moves to be more than that now. And there's going to be tough decisions coming this offseason. So Killian Hayes is going to have to play well. And Corey Joseph is there in, break glass in case of emergency. We need to score points, and we need somebody else at the backup point guard spot. But Jalen Duren should find some more time on the floor this year, and I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, there's no doubt this team should be fun this year. I think the collection of guys that they have, there was a concerted effort this year to bring in athleticism and some veteran shooters, and they did that. Ivy, Duren, everyone says two most explosive athletes in the draft, and Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanović, two great shooters, two great veterans. So you mix those four guys in with that young core that we got to see grow towards the end of last season with Cunningham, Sadiq Bey, Stewart, Isaiah Livers. This should be a much more compelling group this upcoming year. And the Bojan Bogdanović trade really only stimulates that belief for me.
Yep, absolutely. They're going to be a lot more fun to watch. They should look a lot more cohesive as well. I mean, there were nights last year where the offense was Jeremy Grant isolations. Thank God I will not have to watch that again. At least I hope that there is not some form of offense that takes that role away, or rather takes that role back onto the Pistons. But good Lord, it should be a lot more fun and interesting to watch with some stretchier players. Jaden Ivey being really fast and getting to the hole. And now Bogdanović being the vet that can kind of glue the young guys together, at least in the starting lineup. So, yeah, it should be a lot more fun. Aaron, is there anything else you want to touch on as we hurtle towards Media Day?
We're getting there. We're getting there. I mean, next week we'll have everything from Media Day to discuss. So we had some other stuff that we were potentially going to talk about before this trade went down. We'll save that for another time. I'm gonna wrap it up there for myself. I'm good. Except, again, I want to point out that I want the listeners to understand Jasper wasn't here this week, and he let us down big time because that hurt. That hurt.
Got to hammer it home. And I can't speak because there have been instances where I've had to disappear from the podcast for weeks on end. So I have no room to talk. It's really you are the rock that holds Jasper and I together. So kudos to you.
And it's
definitely not him and I.
I'm absolutely joking. If there was something that I really wanted to wrap up saying, it would just be that I'm very appreciative of everyone for listening every week. I had some people messaging me, texting me after the trade went down. It's like, you need to record a podcast. Like, how soon are you going to get the podcast out? So to know that there are people that care that much about our opinion on
was that the same person?
Was that? It was myself.
I said
to myself. I said, "Hey, what
it was you?" Yeah.
But for people that actually care about what we have to say about the Pistons, that they really care that much, like, that's awesome. So you guys have been killing it in terms of support. Really appreciate it, and we're not going anywhere. We're gonna keep bringing out these podcasts, and I'm excited for the season to begin. Hopefully, this year's a little bit of a funner experience for everyone's pleasure. So excited to get underway, and it's been a long off season, but we are right on the cusp of the new year. There's preseason basketball in like 2 weeks, 14 days, I'm pretty sure. So we are
Holy
right.
crap. You blew my mind.
I know. I'm pumped. I'm excited. I miss basketball so much. I am going to watch an unhealthy amount of basketball this year, just around the clock. It's going to be bad, but it's also going to be great.
It's also going to be great because that means we're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about on this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, on the next one, and all the ones after that. Okay, Aaron, this has been fun. We actually had something interesting to talk about other than the ESPN Top 100, which that's a different podcast. I'm sure that the Lakers and Nets podcasts are firing up right now because LeBron and KD are not in the top 5. But we'll talk about that for a different pod. But yes, media day coming up, preseason coming up, and regular season right around the corner. We hope that you'll all be joining us as we traverse the beginning of a new NBA season. It's right around the corner. So for my co-host, Aaron Johnson, and for my co-host that's not here because I'm sure that Aaron wants me to hammer at home, he's not here, Jasper Apollonia, I am Mike Anguilano. So thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network, and brought to you by Bet Online. We will see you all next time, Pistons fans.